Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our special presentation tonight, Faith and Race in Oklahoma. My name is Adam Soltani, and I am the Executive Director of CARE Oklahoma. And in a minute, we'll be introducing our esteemed panelists that have joined us for this evening. I first and foremost want to start off by welcoming everyone to this very important conversation on the issue of what role do faith and race play together and the impact they have on our state and our country. And I hope we will leave this conversation enlightened, inspired, and most definitely committed to making a positive change in our city, state, country, and world. And I first and foremost want to start off also by thanking our sponsors tonight, the Oklahoma Conference of Churches, the Oklahoma Conference of Churches Religions United Committee, CARE Oklahoma, the Oklahoma State University Religious Studies Department, and Respect Diversity Foundation, all of which have come together to put this conversation together and bring the panelists on tonight. And for now, I would like to turn it over to the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Conference of Churches, Reverend Shannon Fleck, who will explain why we felt it was important to have this conversation here tonight. Shannon?
Thanks, Adam. I'm Shannon Fleck, and thrilled to be here with this great group of people and leaders to have this conversation. It's really important, especially for faith communities, to be actively engaged in conversations around race. I think our faith communities and in our secular communities, faith and houses of worship are meant to uphold morality and ethics within our communities. And so when churches, local houses of worship, mosques, synagogues are silent on issues of injustice in our communities, then what does that mean? What does it mean when the very entities that are meant to uphold morality and ethics are silent on issues of injustice? And so we wanted to ensure that faith voices and a faith conversation was happening around the topic of race. And we wanted to ensure that that conversation was inclusive of multiple faith traditions and not just Christianity, because this is something that we are all dealing with as people of faith. And we're really excited to just be able to begin, to just start, to have the conversation and go from there. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you, Reverend Shannon Fleck, for that great introduction. And before we get started with the questions we have for the panelists this evening, let's have introductions, because I'm sure not everyone knows who our respective panelists are. So let's start with DeBorah, Boneta, then Rabbi Vered, Dr. George Young, and Masood, if you could introduce yourselves in that order.
So I am DeBorah Boneta. Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings. I am the Executive Director of Soltani Foundation, which is the Oklahoma Muslim prison program. And we just kind of go in and help with faith leaders in the prison, not only as it regards to Islam, but particularly Islam, because they have kind of been a forgotten population and need a little more assistance. We have a mentoring program and some other programs going on. And thank you for inviting me.
Wonderful. Rabbi Vered Harris?
I'm Vered Harris. I'm the rabbi at Temple B'nai Israel here in Oklahoma City. And thank you, Adam and Shannon, as well as the Respect Diversity Foundation and the other sponsors, for making this conversation happen between us. Temple B'nai Israel is a Jewish congregation, so I am representing, I guess, a voice of Judaism, but also my own voice as I reflect on these issues with you.
Okay, wonderful. Dr. George Young. Let's see. Senator Young, can you hear us? Introduce yourself.
He's muted, it looks like.
Let me unmute him.
Yeah.
I can't unmute him. Oh, there you are.
I can't hear you, Adam.
We can hear you now.
Okay, well, I couldn't hear Adam, so I don't know what direction. I don't know what directions we got. I can hear everybody except Adam, so I don't know why.
Oh no.
So, am I introducing myself?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you. I still can't hear Adam. My name is George Young. I'm the senator for State Senate District 48, which is northeast Oklahoma City and parts of northwest Oklahoma City. And prior to my 2 terms in the House and now first term in the Senate, I pastored in Oklahoma City and Boley, Oklahoma for 30 years. And so the work that I'm doing now is really trying to do some of the same things that I was pastoring. That is, try to filter what is going on through the lens of our faith and our belief. And so we're in the midst of that right now.
Wonderful. And Masood, please introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Masood Abdul-Haqq. I was invited as the chairman of Masjid Mu'min. It's the oldest Muslim place of worship in the state of Oklahoma. And I represent them from the standpoint of a chairman. I'm not necessarily the faith leader, the imam. And I'm also on the board at CARE. So I have some intersectionality there. And my day job, I'm a business consultant and business owner. People may have seen one of our businesses, Peace of Mind Pediatrics, featured rather prominently with my wife, Dr. Noor Jihan, in recent weeks.
Wonderful. Well, Reverend Fleck, would you like to get started with the first question for our panelists?
Oh, of course. I'd love it. All right. So, panel, we're just going to dive right in. Question number 1, something just to think about. What does your particular faith tradition have to say about differences in race and ethnicity and culture? And what does it have to say about the treatment and equality of individuals?
Can I quickly say before we get started, Shannon, I can hear you, but
Yep.
I cannot hear Adam.
Well, I mean, isn't that better for you, Senator? In general?
Yeah,
I think it's good.
A
It's
couple
fine.
of folks, I could hear everybody except Adam and Masood. I can't hear either one of them, so I don't know if their mics, they just don't want me to hear them or what. But remember that I cannot hear Adam or
Okay.
Masood. But go ahead.
I love it.
So I think I'll dive right in. I'll take
Thank
the
you.
first there. So much like Christianity, you know, in the Bible it says, you know, that God is not the respecters of person. Just that in Islam, you know, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, reminds us that of all of God's wonderful creations, he created us of many tongues as many colors. And I think that most prominently, the day of prayer, Muslims pray on Friday. And the day of prayer is one of the most diverse days where you see, you know, as many skin tones and colors and languages that are praying of the same prayer. I believe that that is the very heart of our religion, and what it speaks to is the love of diversity and the love of one another.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Rabbi Reverend?
Yes, ma'am. I think that within Judaism, we have similar texts as what DeBorah just so beautifully discussed. And we have what I call sort of our aspirations, right? Our prayers are aspirational, and even our values are aspirational. We have to them. So we have a sense, and I think that there is a sense, that the Jewish community is pretty white and of European descent. That's true in many communities. Sociologists estimate somewhere between 6 and 13% people of color within North American Jewry. At the same time, Judaism is a religion that's been practiced on almost every continent and by people of all different ethnic and racial backgrounds. So aspirationally, absolutely, Judaism teaches that we all, every person, deserves and is valued in terms of creating a relationship with God. I think that in reality, many people in North America experience the Jewish community to struggle with being fully accepting of Jewish people of all races, and that we have the same kinds of struggles in terms of people having trouble accepting all people who may look different as the general society seems to have as well as the same amount of passion and activism for pursuing justice for all people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. The Reverend Dr. Senator George Young, in that order.
My mama named me George, so I'd like to hear that more often than all of the rest of this stuff.
All right.
Listen, Christianity, obviously, as I listened to the intros of the other two, they talked about their, at least a portion of their belief and their faith structure. Christianity is so much a part of that, so much in tune to that, so much comes out of that. And so I hearken back to the words of Jesus that said, love your neighbor as yourself. And so that kind of opens up the whole possibility of things, of what we're seeing right now. I think when we start exercising not only the words, but putting those words into action and breathing life into those words, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, who is your neighbor? Whoever is in need. And so I think this moment, this time, helps us to bring that particular scripture to life, and to give it some breath, and to give it some legs, and to give it some, I think, give it some time that we need to have it done, and have it done right now. And so that's really what it has done for me. This whole moment, the last 2 weeks have brought that out, and has put a new emphasis upon particularly that passage, but other passages I hope I'll be able to share as we move on in this evening.
Oh yes. Thank you. Masood?
Yeah, of course, Sister DeBorah, said it beautifully. There's an ayat in the Quran, a verse in the Quran where it talks about, verily I have made you in nations and tribes so that you may get to know one another. And often I use that as a kind of a counterpoint to people who suggest that race is some sort of figment of our imagination or a social construct that was created by man. No, God is acknowledging that he made us differently. And it wasn't so that we could try to assimilate with one another or put each other down, but rather that we diversify ourselves and uplift our worldview via interaction with each other. So that's always a great one. And then, of course, Senator Young just mentioned what Jesus said, and the Prophet Muhammad had a similar saying, but it was truly, you do not truly believe until you want for your brother what you want for yourself, what you would love for your brother, what you love for yourself. So those would be the ones that I think would speak to the issue of race and how we're supposed to interact with one another.
Absolutely. I'd like to point out also that the similarities in these different texts we're talking about. Imagine that. Adam?
Yes. I took myself out and added myself back in, so I don't know if Senator Young can hear me now, but if not, you may have to repeat the question.
Senator Young, can you hear Adam now?
I was in heaven for a little while. I can hear everybody except heaven, and now I don't know where I am now because I can't hear Adam. So, yes, Adam, I can hear you.
I love it. I'm so glad that we can have a few laughs and smiles while heading into a very serious topic. So the next question is a harder question, and I appreciate these different perspectives on from the different faith traditions. But I just want to get your raw reaction, whether it be your personal, your emotional, or your spiritual reaction to the tragedy of the killing of George Floyd. And I'm just going to leave it at that. When you heard the news, you may have seen the video. What was your reaction? How did it make you feel? And maybe start with DeBorah. We can go in the same order.
So I think I got to the video and heard it a little bit later. I was actually out in the field working when someone called me and asked me if I was emotionally okay with what was going on. I have 4 children, and 2 of my children are males. My son is a 32-year-old Black man. And it was a gut punch. And my first reaction was, oh my God, not again. Why can't we get it together? Why are we still killing people? Why are Black individuals still on the menu? It has been a very hard time for me. Racism has touched my family on multiple levels personally. And it is disheartening to know that at the age of 53, that my mother, who is almost 80, and I have so much in common, that we are facing the same tragedies over this span of time. And it's absolutely heartbreaking.
Wow, thank you. That was powerful to hear, and it really struck a nerve in my heart of concern. But I appreciate you and your willingness to share that. Rabbi Vered?
I mean, I'll pick up on DeBorah's last word, heartbreaking. I mean, I don't know if there's any other human response, but heartbroken, powerless, frustrated isn't strong enough of a word, but frustrated, angry, to look at the world and say, this is not the world that God has asked us to create. And I mean, there aren't words, Adam, just heartbroken again.
Yeah, I understand, and I completely relate to the feeling, and it's hard because we sometimes become desensitized to all the violence we see on television and hear in the news. But when I saw the video, it was beyond belief for me that this could still be happening in our country, that we're still dealing with the same issues we've been dealing with, not only for years, but for hundreds of years. And we'll get into that more, but it's sometimes hard to believe that this is reality. Masood?
Yeah. Well, for me, the way we process these things, I have to be very careful because my mental state is something that I have to protect above all. If I'm going to continue to be effective in the community, effective as a leader, effective, as the head of a household, as a father, and quite honestly, the event what happened to George Floyd, it revealed to me something that upset me, because there was like no lower place that I was already there. I make it a point to not view death videos. But I understand that they can be a match that strikes a fire in other people. But for me, the killing of the murder of George Floyd was no more egregious than the murder of Philando Castile or Trayvon Martin, or so many others, all the way back to Emmett Till and the nameless and the faceless ones that have come in our history. So it shined a light in myself as a young Black man that we have to compartmentalize things and be able to tuck it away and mask our rage and mask our pain in so many ways, because it's often misconstrued by the same people. And if we express it in the wrong way, then we're at risk of being the next one. If we say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, go the wrong place, so we have to be careful. So to sum it up, I'd say that I was most alarmed that I was not alarmed, but I'm glad that the world has had the response that it has had, and it's long overdue.
Senator Young, can we get your response to what happened and how you felt, especially when you initially heard the news of the death of George Floyd?
Angry. Yeah, it was. Once again, I was angry. I'm listening, and I turned 66 this year, and so to give you some context, I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, as many of you know, and so the intervening year since I was 10 years old and heard of the first time of such an event in Memphis and Shelby County, where the Shelby County Sheriff's Department beat a young man, 16 years old, beat him to death not too far from my house and my home, where I was born and raised, on the route to my elementary school that I went to every day. I was angry when I saw it again, but it, for whatever reason, and it could be my age, the anger was different. I realized that I don't know if the movement, the things that we're in the midst of right now had started, but it was a different anger. It was an anger that quickly I saw and felt the ability of others to help me to express that anger. And I felt then that this has some legs on it, has some possibilities on it, that this anger may not be something that I have to contain. This anger may be something that moves us to a different spot. And so from the very beginning, it was like that because it was so egregious. It was so emboldened. It was so devastating that when I saw it, I knew this is a moment in time that has to change the rest of our lives. And so that was the impact it had upon me when I first saw it.
Wow. Adam, you used the phrase, and I think that Senator Young picked up on it, and Masood for sure as well. You used the phrase beyond belief. And I think that one of the pieces that upsets me so much is that it's not beyond belief. One of the pieces that enrages me is that it's not beyond belief. And I think that we have to be careful with that. I think that we have to have an acknowledgement that we have to believe it over and over, and that we have to go from believing it and seeing it as the reality, and then asking, how do we change this reality? Because this is not the world that it's supposed to be.
Well, I think it's almost this protectiveness, as the mother of Black children. It is beyond belief because it is, my God, that could be my child. And when your child is now 15 minutes late coming home, when you know they should be home at a certain time, it is the panic. And so it's almost a protective mode of, if I believe this again, then I believe that this could be my child any day. And how do I protect myself in this moment, protect my sanity in this moment, not become so enraged and so wild that I go out and say and or do something that is destructive or counterproductive to what does need to change.
Yeah, absolutely. That was beautiful, DeBorah. And I think when I say beyond belief, I think part of my problem is that I have this undying hope in humanity, and I always have this hope that things are going to get better, things will improve, that people deep down inside are good people. So yeah, I do recognize, and that's going to lead into my next question here in a few minutes after Reverend Fleck asks her question. But I understand that what has happened to George Floyd is not something that just obviously happened out of nowhere. There's a long history, and I'll get to that in a minute. But, I just always feel like we should be moving past these things. And I have this hope that we can move past these things. And I focus so much on the positive, because if you focus on the negative, then you just kind of get drowned in that sorrow, in that despair. And maybe I'm too trusting in humanity. Maybe I'm a bit naive when it comes to that, but I just want better for all of us. And so I think that's why, anytime I see something like this, it's just like hard to believe it's actually reality, because I don't want to believe it, because I believe humanity is better than that. So that's kind of my thoughts on the saying.
And to clarify my perspective in saying almost the same thing, it's like I come from the polar opposite. I grew up in a place that was riddled by crime and drugs, and I can recall a particular instance where I missed a school bus, and I'm standing on the corner with my backpack on, trying to catch the public bus to school, and there's drug activity in the area, and police pull up, and all these other kids that are up to no good, they run. And I stand there because I'm just like, well, I don't have anything to do with that. And the police, they come and they body slam me on the pavement, go through my, rummage through all of my my belongings, and that's just a normal part of life. There's no report to fill. There's nothing that you can really do about it. It's just like, next time you better run. And then now you're standing at the bus stop the next time, like, next time I'm gonna run, and then I'm gonna be subject to be killed because now why did you run, right? So that's a constant reality. So it's not a sense of I don't believe it's happening. It's that I'm already completely jaded. I don't have a whole lot of I don't have a lot of great expectations for the systems, particularly the police and the way they handled me, especially at my younger ages. So it's just a matter of I'm already at maximum outrage in general. That's an old quote from James Baldwin, to be, I can't remember it exactly, but basically to be aware, to be socially conscious in America is to be in a constant state of rage. So like Sister DeBorah said, it's just a matter of like, okay, I need to turn this down for a little while just so I can go perform what I need to perform to be a productive member of society.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's a very interesting perspective. Thank you for sharing. I've learned so much already, and I find this to be a very enriching conversation. Reverend Fleck, would you like to ask the next question?
Yeah, we're already kind of naturally leading into this part of the conversation where we really want to dive into what do we do to fix it, right? So what we've seen a lot of eruption happening just from the sheer disbelief, overwhelmed, maxed out on rage. The protests that have come up from the grassroots level, all people coming together to protest, organizing for Black Lives Matter. We've seen demands that have been made here locally in Oklahoma of our elected officials and of law enforcement. So we've seen a lot of movement, not just here in Oklahoma, but nationwide, clearly, and even globally. So what do you all think people need to be focusing their time and energy toward to help motivate and move toward change? Like, what do individuals need to be focusing on right now? And I'd like to start with Senator Young this time, if that's okay.
Yes. Well, again, and listening to the rest of the panel, this anger that does reside in many of us who have witnessed and experienced over our lifetime, this suppression of our very beings as human. The conversation has to start, and people. I love what's going on right now. I want the protest to continue, but there's got to be this honest conversation about racism. Not, I don't see color, because then you take away from my very being who I am. I'm Black, and I like being Black. I've been Black all my life, and my Blackness represents something not only to me, but it ought to represent something to you. This discussion about race and the differences in race and how we got to this point in time, I think that's what's important right now. Even while the protests continue on, which I want them. Again, let me repeat that. I want the protests to continue, because that puts more pressure on individuals to have this conversation about race. It's about our origins as a country. We were created, the founding document that had the line, and we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and parenthetically women are created equal. It was a lie when they wrote it, and our job should have been to make that statement the truth. And the only way to make that statement the truth is to talk about how we established this country on some things that were wrong. Not almost wrong, not we need labor, not we need land, and so we have to do something. It was wrong. And so we've got to have that discussion, because the only way you can get to someone's belief is through the conversation, honest conversation. And so right now, I think it's a good time. I don't want to rush anything. I don't want to push anything out of the way. I want the pressure of the protest to continue, but I want us to have some one-on-one honest conversations with individuals about racism, about what it means, not going around it, not being afraid of it, not trying to dodge it, but facing it head on, that racism exists in this country. Yeah, our country is built upon it. And until we talk about it, we're not going to be able to get into the belief systems of people who hold these things inside of them.
Yes. Yes.
Amen.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Masood, what do you think?
I think there's very few situations that are more unenviable than following up Dr.
Yeah.
I agree.
George Young once he gets rolling like that. So
Yeah.
there's even a whole lot more that I could say to add on to it, but I'll attempt to. So I'll have to go to our scripture, and a lot of people don't know that in Islam the most mentioned person in the entire Quran is Moses, right? He's called Musa, and it tells this entire story about the relationship between Musa and Pharaoh. And it says in one verse that indeed Pharaoh had become tyrannical in the land, and he divided people into all these different groups. And he picked one of these groups and he persecuted them, slaughtering their sons, keeping their women alive. And that was the group that Moses came from, because he was afraid of that group. He knew that that group had power. He knew that it had character, that it had strength, and that if he were to let his foot off of their neck at any given point, one of those sons was going to grow up and destroy that hierarchy that he created, right? So the very next verse, it talks about, God says, we want to bestow favor on those who are deemed weak and oppressed in the land and make them leaders and inheritors. And of course, those of us who know the story of Moses, we understand that the one who helped him the most was actually the one who was closest to the Pharaoh, his wife, right? So she helped him become who he needed to become in order to actually overthrow and become that leader, become that inheritor. So the ones who are the closest to those oppressors right now, the ones who are closest to the ones who are oppressing, who have their knee in our neck right now of this mighty, powerful people, and everybody can see it, right? It's on them to make sure that they facilitate that inheritance that we have coming to us. It's on them, it's on you guys to make sure that you're having conversations, because the people who need to hear these conversations are never in the room while they're taking. So it's the people who have access to those ears and those minds to go to those people and have these conversations, initiate these conversations, correct them, stop them when they're being mentioned and they think it's in friendly company. Let them know that you're not friendly company anymore. NASCAR, of all things, has been a major leader in this regard. It's long been seen as like a hotbed for racists and people who empathize with the Deep South and some of the ills that come with that. And they've banned the Confederate flag. They've gone on an extensive campaign. That's a perfect example of what some of the people can do in order to help eradicate this problem.
Yeah, and let me just reaffirm all that by saying this is white people that need to be engaging in this work. We as white people have to call out ourselves. We have to engage this topic. We really have to ground ourselves and know what our privilege is, the history of it, and work to overcome the systems that have protected us as white people, right? So we live in this bubble and we can't even see our own privilege because the world has been created to keep us safe in that space. So we have to come together and work hard to overcome that. And so I appreciate that. I think even though we as white people now weren't the oppressors, we still are oppressing now. You know, even though I wasn't alive back in whatever day people want to go to, that history is relevant now. And white people continue to be in oppressive situations, maybe without even realizing it. So we have to do that work, and it's going to be hard, but that's a part of what we have to be doing. Sorry, I went on a little rant there.
I would like to quickly add on, Reverend Fleck, to what you said, because I agree with you. You know, being half white, my mother being white, and she was born and raised in Olathe, Kansas. I completely understand the mentality. In fact, I understand the reality of having family members that won't speak with me, that won't have a relationship with me just because I'm Muslim, because my father's from Iran, because he is not white. So I understand that mentality, but I also would say that non-Black communities in America and around the world, now that this kind of movement has moved beyond the U.S., we see protests even and rallies and discussions about it in different countries, also need to take account of themselves, because I will be the first to say that within the Muslim community, there is an issue, and we've had these discussions about racism within the Muslim community, within cultures, whether they be cultures from the Middle East, or different Muslim countries in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. There is a preference to lighter colored skin. There is almost a reverence towards white people, and a negative view of people with darker skin, and definitely a negative view of Black people. So that's something that not only white people need to consider having these conversations, I must have these conversations, in fact, but I would say all communities need to be having these conversations, recognize that maybe they have bias, they have prejudices that are not overt, they're not coming out in this very vicious, hateful manner, but yet they still are harmful and hurtful. And I wanted to say that before we hear from Rabbi Vered, because I don't know, I will admit that's something we have in the Muslim community as a challenge. I don't know if the Jewish community in Oklahoma or in the United States also faces a similar challenge, but it's something that we recognize, and I will and I have brought up numerous times over the years, whether it be in sermons or in public forums. And I think it's important that if we're a community as Muslims that say the Quran, our holy book, preaches justice, that the Prophet Muhammad preached racial equality, then we have to uphold those ideals amongst ourselves first and foremost. So Rabbi Vered, love to hear.
Well, just as people of color can be any religion, people who are Jewish can be any color. So there's sort of some overlap and, Venn diagramming going on there. There's a great podcast called Holy Jewish, WHOLLY is an entirely Holy Jewish. And the whole first season was devoted to talking about what it is to be a person of color within the Jewish community. Second season launched, and it's continuing to deal with that issue, as well as LGBTQ plus within the Jewish community. I think that in general, the Reform Jewish movement of Judaism is pretty forward-looking in challenging us to have these conversations, both what it means within the Jewish community and outside of the Jewish community. For many years, I've taken high school students on civil rights journeys down to Georgia and Alabama to understand more about particularly the civil rights movement. I've been doing that with high school students for 15 years, maybe more. So we want to have these conversations because these are conversations of justice. This past January, we did have a 4-part dialogue that was co-sponsored by the Temple, Langston University, the Ralph Ellison Foundation, Respect Diversity Foundation, and it was baby steps into this honest conversation that takes trust for us to be able to have the conversations with one another. But I definitely hear and agree with the challenge that we have to have also conversations within our communities, recognizing that our community may not be, when I talk about the Jewish community, I'm not talking about an entirely white community, but the Jewish community, which is in Oklahoma City, majority white, also has to have the conversation. So some things that we're doing at the Temple, in addition to things that we have done, right? It's not like we just started this work this week or anything. So moving forward, we have started the last couple of weeks encouraging people to go to the website shopblackok.com and to support local business and independently owned, particularly Black businesses, because in addition to, of course, the economic toll of the coronavirus, there is economic injustice that is simply a part of the society that we're in. So that's one piece. The second piece is continuing the idea of sacred listening, that we have to listen to each other, and that is not all obligation put onto our friends who are friends who are Black or brown, but we have to listen to those voices without placing on people the burden to always have to teach us. So we're starting a campaign. We haven't announced it yet, so I guess I'm announcing it here. We're starting a campaign that in July we're going to have a one temple, one book conversation, and we're going to encourage everybody to read one of Ibram X. Kendi's books. Right now I'm working through Stamped, Stamped from the Beginning. And so that's the history, the definitive history, I think, is the subtitle of Racism in America. But also, of course, he also wrote How to Be an Anti-Racist. So we're going to choose one of those and encourage everybody to read it and for us to have an internal conversation about that. And we're also, I'd like to, I guess, challenge and encourage other people who have pulpits, other people who are white and have pulpits, to approach one of the pastors, two of the pastors, five of the pastors, or other religious leaders from the Black community who they respect and are moved by, and invite them onto their pulpit. So, and not this coming Friday, but a week from, Reverend James Dunbar from Greater Cleves is going to be joining me at the temple to have a conversation so that I can listen. And it's just little steps here and there.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Listening, you mentioned something I just want to emphasize on, because I have repeated that several times over the last, I guess, 2 or 3 weeks, which is to listen. Those of us who are not Black should be listening to the Black voices, uplifting them and understanding. It is not my place, although I don't really consider myself necessarily white by definition, because I'm half white. My father's brown, and so I'm somewhat undefined according to American tradition, right? Traditionally, my father was even categorized as white, but I don't see myself as white. I see myself as non-white, but yet still, and I post this on Facebook, no matter what I've been through in my life, whether it's been being called a terrorist by a state legislator, whether it's been getting death threats, whether it's having seen the reality of hatred firsthand in terms of hate crimes against Muslims, I can go on, but I will never and can never know what it's like to be a Black man or woman in America. I can never know what it was like to be in the civil rights era of the United States, where Black people were literally fighting for their lives. I will never know what it's like to live in the late 1800s and early 1900s, like Richard Wright wrote in his book Black Boy, and to be treated worse than a homeless dog, you know. And these are the things that I can't ever understand. And so that's why we have to listen. So I just want to emphasize that for all the people who are watching tonight. Let us listen to those who can help us understand and help us know how we can be allies in the movement towards justice. And last but not least, we haven't heard yet from Sister DeBorah. So please, we would like to hear from you.
So, you know, I think it is so incredibly important to have those conversations within. Ask yourself, who are you when no one's looking? And what does your inner circle look like? If all of your gatherings look just like you, ask yourself why. If all of your boards and communities and committees and usher boards and whatever, if they all look alike, ask yourself what you were doing and why this is. Is it because you are exclusive? Is it because you are not used to diversity? Diversity is such a beautiful thing. It's so incredible. Kind of reiterating what Dr. Young said is, I am up to my eyes with people that say, oh, I'm colorblind. I don't want you to be blind. I want you to see me and all of my glory and all of my flaws. I want you to see me, and I want you to love me for who I am in this moment, in this brown skin. And we need to have those conversations. I was born, growing up, I was Christian, and I became Muslim a little later in life. And I have, unfortunately, been on the short end of the stick for racism in Christianity and Islam. And on a panel yesterday, someone asked me which area was more hurtful for racism. And I think that is the same as saying, if I poke you in the eye or if I stick you in the eye, which one hurts worse? I think it's the same. But start those conversations at home. You know, when your children say, my Black friend at school, don't hush him. You know, talk about that. You know, what does that mean? Is that a descriptive statement? Is it a negative statement? When your kids make statements, I remember someone coming to one of the places that I work one time to donate some items, and they said, oh, we want to give this to the poor Black person. And the mom said, oh, shh, I told you not to say that in public. That's the wrong answer. That is absolutely the wrong answer. The answer is don't say that. You know, so we have to have these very honest conversations within ourselves, and then circle out with around those that are closest to us in our families. And then maybe in your community, in your job, on your boards. What do your boards look like? What do your communities look like? And have those honest conversations. And I think that's where it has to begin. I can have a conversation with you, but you are here. And like Masood said, most of the people that need to hear this are never in the room.
Wow. That's powerful, and definitely gives so much to think about and ponder upon. I see you, Masood. 1 second. I'm going to give you the floor. I just want to say, I put up on the screen, if anyone does have any questions, we will, at 8 o'clock, we will move into any questions. I know there's already one in the queue, but please post them in the comments, and we will ask your questions of the panelists. And Masood, did you want to add something?
Yes, since we do have two Christians with us today and highly exalted and knowledgeable, I thought if we're having the difficult conversations that I'd bring up the topic of Exodus 20:4-6, right, where the Bible and God is explicitly telling us not to make images, not to create a likeness of him. And, you know, unfortunately, that's been ignored a lot over the years, and it has been perverted in order to, certain people have hijacked elements of Christianity to enable it to become a powerful tool of white supremacy. Of course, a lot of us know about the Ku Klux Klan identifying itself as a Christian organization and burning crosses and being symbols of terror, and also implementing that image of white Jesus and putting it on the wall for so many Black people and establishing dominance that way. Because if God is white and if his son is white, then the ones who look closer to them are naturally probably supposed to be superior to me. That's the mind trick that was played. So what are we doing in our churches to walk that back, to unravel, you know, and basically take back our religion? It's a beautiful religion, but it was hijacked. Like, how are we addressing that, and how are we addressing people in our communities who have been inundated with this image of white Jesus for so many years?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Dr. Young, do you want to go first here?
Oh yes, I don't mind. Listen, you're talking about a perversion.
Yeah.
And it's wrong. And it's wrong. And the only way to deal with perversion is to confront it face on. And so, yes, that's the problem. That is the problem, is that we have not faced this problem. We have not confronted this problem. We always try to find some other way around it. And this is the fact. If you were born and raised in America, you have some racist tendencies inside of you. You may not let them come out often, but they're there. And most folk let them come out because everything has been built on that. Everything has been designed around that. It has been a system that says these people are better than these people. And so you got to talk about that. You got to discuss that. History in elementary school, in junior high school, in high school, really in college, those fallacies about history have not been confronted. The perversions that took place, not only in religion, but in the common everyday life, they have not been faced. So until we face them, until we call them out, until we call them what they are, wrong. There is no going around it. There is no, they could possibly have a point. There is no point. There is no point to that. It is a perversion and it is wrong. And so we've got to face that. We've got to face, and I think this is an opportunity for us to do this. DeBorah was talking about it. Man, I've been on almost every day, 2 or 3 of these, and I'm telling you, I don't mind, because the more this conversation takes place, the closer we're going to get to trying and then having to touch someone's belief and then impacting someone's action to get to a point where we are who we have been designed and built to be, and that is in unity as one body.
Yes, I love it. I'll just add, it's really, you, Masood, have touched on it so beautifully, the intentionality of creating white images of Jesus. And then if Jesus is the Son of God, then clearly God must also be white. And there's the common images of what people think God looks like. And it's usually an old white man with a white beard, right? Jesus was not white. Plain and simple, the white-skinned, blue-eyed Jesus that hangs in so many churches is, as Dr. Young just said, a perversion of reality and meant to intentionally instill a vision of superiority in a skin color. I don't know when that image specifically originated, but it definitely bled into the colonization of this country, thinking about, the indigenous population that European settlers brought this religion and brought these images of this religion. And then those settlers who colonized this country and created such trauma and terror upon our indigenous population then wrote founding documents that we are still not living into fully, and then utilized this religion and this Christianity to justify slavery, to justify to justify all kinds of terrors, the burning of the cross from the Ku Klux Klan. People have weaponized Christianity and the Bible and the symbols of the religion to their own purposes. And most predominantly, those purposes have been for white people.
I will say, I want to chime in. So I grew up as a younger child in Holland. My father was Air Force. And I grew up with the knowledge that you were either military or you were a civilian. There really wasn't any, that's the only 2 things that I knew. My color was never an issue. It was never spoken of. I don't know that I really knew I was Black until I got to Oklahoma. But I remember seeing a picture of Jesus that had a foil and or a reflective face of it. And so anytime one of the children would step in front of it, Jesus looked like we looked. And we were told growing up that Jesus is a spirit and reflection of you. And so that your relationship with him was so personal. And I loved that I didn't grow up thinking that Jesus was white. I thought Jesus was me, or a reflection of my good character and my color. Just as if someone were Asian and they stood in front of it, it would look like them. And so I was very blessed to grow up in an era where I did not feel oppressed as much. But my family is very eclectic. There is a little bit of everything everywhere. So we were just not aware of those colors until we moved to Oklahoma, and then it was a slap in the face.
Man. Well, I love hearing that, DeBorah, about a reflective Jesus. I think that's incredibly powerful and something I would have loved to have seen growing up and to see now.
That's something I've heard for the first time. A very interesting perspective indeed. And before we have a few good questions that we want to definitely address, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I I do have a question, on the practical level, I want to ask all the panelists. I mean, I think, anybody who looks at things objectively will agree that America is a country that was founded upon and built upon, not only in the beginning, but for hundreds of years, on a foundation that was purely racist, on a foundation that held whites superior to non-whites, in particular blacks. And all you have to do is look at the slave trade to realize that. And of course, with the civil rights movement, and we live in a country that we have Martin Luther King Day, we have Black History Month. When growing up, we were kind of given the indication. I grew up in Kansas, went to school with, majority of my classmates were white, had very few non-white friends and non-white classmates. So kind of the way we were taught growing up, and I think it's probably the same in a lot of places in Oklahoma and throughout the country, is that, Black people fought for their rights through the civil rights movement. Schools were desegregated. There were these, laws that were passed, equality, and so on and so forth, and everything is good now, right? That's kind of the feel-good story, which is not accurate. And then, of course, I started this work 8 years ago with CARE Oklahoma, and I got to see firsthand hatred projected towards people of my own faith for no other reason other than that they were Muslim, or they wore the hijab, or the country of their origin. And so back in 2015, I took a class with one of my favorite professors of all time, Dr. George Henderson, down at OU. And, he was very much involved in the civil rights movement, and he helped desegregate Little Rock schools, wrote a great book called Race in the University. I highly recommend checking out. And long story short, I asked him one day in class, I said, Dr. Henderson, you have lived through the civil rights movement. You were a part of it. You have seen all of this with your own eyes. I would like to know from your perspective, have we changed as a country? Have we moved in the right direction? And his response was actually very eye-opening to me, in which he said, we have only taken baby steps. We haven't actually changed much because we haven't dealt with the root cause of the problem. And I think now what we're seeing is, because we never dealt with the root cause of the problem, we now see that things are getting to a point where the killing of George Floyd is the straw that broke the camel's back, so to say. So I would like to hear your comments on this, if you have any, but also on a practical level, where do we go from here? What are some practical steps that people can take to really make change in their personal life and in the communities they live in? And Senator Young, I'd like to start with you, if we could, please.
Well, I want us to keep the discomfort up. We've got to keep the discomfort that is present right now. We've got to keep that up. Probably me and Dr. Henderson, who I know Dr. Henderson, probably around the same age. Kindergarten to 8th grade, I went to an all-black school, and then 9th grade in high school, I went to an integrated school, and so I was a part of that group. I was in Memphis when Dr. King was assassinated. I went through some of those riotous moments when things occurred. But to address your question, and Dr. Henderson is right, we have not been forced to deal with this question of racism from a personal standpoint, and that's where we are now. That's why it's so difficult for many people to get on board with Black Lives Matter. It is difficult to admit that you have some things going on inside of you and your psyche and your very existence that go against a common human welfare. And so we've got to continue to make it uncomfortable, because unless we do that, we're not going to get to that conversation. And so it's an interesting point now. For me, because of all that I've seen and because of all that I've gone through in life, that we're at this moment. And I'm hopeful and cautiously hopeful because I have seen something that I have not ever seen before. And that is three things about what's presently going on that I think talks to what you're talking about, Adam, is where we go from here. One, I was at the rally in Oklahoma City a couple of Sundays ago, and three things impacted me. One was the number of people who were there. It was a large number of people there. It was a great crowd, large crowd, a very, very large crowd. Two, the diversity of that crowd. I bet you it was 60, at least 60% of that crowd was white. The third thing was the age of that crowd. There were young people in there. And as I talked with these young people, they could not relate to me as far as institutional racism is concerned. But what they had seen, what had drawn them to this moment in time was someone's knee on a human being's neck. It was a human right issue. Then they connected to the things that they heard about the injustices that African Americans have endured for years. That's what brought these folk up. That's what brought these young people out. And as long as we can allow them to expend this energy to show that they care, to show that they want something different, they want something better than what we have gone through, what we have designed. And they're smart enough to know that it's built on falsehood. It's built on, what I said earlier, on perversity. And even Black young people know the disparities that they are operating within, that they have got to have something different. So I believe where we are right now is, listen, we need to let this ride. We need to let it go through. I've seen enough of this that we've shut it down too quick many times. And again, as I said earlier, listen, I think people need to continue to expend this energy and talk about the things that are touching their hearts, their souls, and their spirits, things that make them say what has been said already. This is heartbreaking. For me, it's still angry. And, I still want to run around saying, say it loud. I'm Black and I'm proud. So that folk will understand that is meaningful to me.
Beautiful. Wow. That well said. And some very practical steps that people can take. And I was at that rally too, a few Sundays ago, and I was also impressed. And it does give me hope that people are willing to speak up and that people are willing to show up, that we are headed in the right direction. But I think it's going to take some very difficult work, and it's really going to require that we confront what we've been told our entire lives, no matter where we come from, what our religion is, what our cultural background is. We're going to have to come face to face with the reality that what we've been told may not be what the reality is. Masood, would you like to add anything?
Oh,
you're muted, Masood.
I was going to say, I was actually looking forward to hearing from Rabbi Vered. We haven't heard from her in such a long time.
Rabbi Vered, then.
Okay, then. Thank you for the invitation. One of the things that I'm thinking about is the function of the denial of other people's humanity. When we talk about this country being built on racism, when we talk about this country being built by the blood and the sweat and the work of enslaved people, the whole basis of that was the denial of humanity of other people. And I'd like to believe, when we're talking, Adam, you're talking about belief, I would like to believe that we have received widespread revelation of the cruelty, the evil, the terror and horror of othering other human beings for our own benefit. We haven't. And there are so many examples of that throughout the world that aren't necessarily based on race, but that's the topic for us for now. And I think that we have to start there. I think that we have to start in our daily lives and interactions and thinking about how we other people and deny them their humanity, deny them their creativity, deny them their unique culture. For me, that in and of itself is a challenge for so many of us. So for me, starting there is critical, and that is sacred listening, and it's got to be bold and unapologetic reflection and review of why I other others, why I look at other people and I feel like I need to gain power from seeing how I somehow have some superiority over them. And that's painful, and it is shameful. It's humiliating. It is really hard to do, and it's a part of the human experience. So for us to be fully human, we need to be willing to embrace that. I guess that's where I'm at right now with it.
Very well said, and thank you for sharing that. In fact, you said something that really stuck with me, is the idea of othering, making someone feel as if they don't belong because they're outside of what should be accepted. And as Muslims, we know, Rabbi Harris, you were with me at the Capitol when the former state legislator called me and Imam and Chasi terrorists and suit-wearing jihadis. And the point of that was to push us outside of the realm of what should be societally or culturally acceptable into the realm of the other, because when you push somebody into the realm of the other, then you no longer see them as human. And that's why I'm a little harsh, and for my Muslim brothers and sisters watching, I am very blunt about it with my Muslim family, because we have known what it's like in Oklahoma in particular, but even in the United States, to be treated as second-class citizens. We know what it's like when the government passes a law to ban Sharia. We know what it's like to have our women treated differently just because they wear the headscarf. We know what it's like to be taunted just because of our faith or our name or the color of our skin. Therefore, shame on us as Muslims, in particular if we're not Black, to not be natural allies with the Black community when it comes to Black Lives Matter, when it comes to standing up against police brutality. So anyone who has faced this, experience of being pushed into the category of the other can relate, should relate, and really should do themselves a favor and be an ally of the Black community and all other communities that face injustice. So that's just my opinion.
Adam, I'm gonna throw in, for people who are listening to you say that and thinking, well, I've never felt that way, then I'd like to maybe challenge them to intentionally travel somewhere where they will be that other. Because there are lots of places in the world, no matter what any six of us looks like, there are lots of places in the world that we can go to where we are the other. And that includes that there are places within Oklahoma City that any of us could go to be other, or places all around the world. And I think that experiencing that can really be a beautiful challenge.
Good point. Good point. Putting yourselves in a situation that's not necessarily comfortable at first, but so that you can grow, and you only grow and learn when you're in an uncomfortable situation. Good point. Good point. Sister DeBorah, do you have anything you'd like to add before we get to a few questions?
I am so proud and happy to be having this conversation, and I would challenge people of faith not to faith shame people. Mm-hmm. I was in a conversation with someone the other day where a minister told me that I couldn't have faith and fear, and that my faith needed to be a little bit stronger if I was scared for my son. Mm. And that was pretty much what I said. Trying to hold my tongue. I am not known for being politically correct. And we shouldn't faith shame people. We shouldn't judge people. And I have found people of faith to be some of the judgiest people I've ever met. And we have to get out of that. We have to understand that people are where they are. My father, Alan Crawford, used to say all the time that people are like golf balls. You have to play them where they land. And so if someone lands in the realm of fear, maybe pray them through. I remember listening to something that said we grow through what we go through. And we need to be able to grow in this moment, but we can't do that if somebody caps us. And so allow them to take the lid off. Allow them to have an honest conversation about their fear and their faith and how they intersect together, and how I can be full of faith and full of fear. It's a if-then conversation. It's a if this happens, I know what's going to happen here. I know that God's got me. I know that God's got my back. But if this happens, I'm afraid. And so I'm not worried about the then, because I trust God. I'm worried about this if. And so we have to be able to comfort people in their if moments.
And my piece on this is that, I kind of want to echo what Senator Young said, in that this does feel a little different. This doesn't seem like just another uprising and like it's just going to fade away anytime soon. I mean, we see it across the world. We see it in all 50 states. And my recommendation to anybody outside of the Black community is to figure out ways to upgrade our support. If you're an ally, consider being an abolitionist, like being on the front lines. Consider being somebody who's actively seeking solutions and putting your voice and your faith and your privilege, making it a weapon for good. For my community, and this is what I've spent most of the time since all of this has started thinking about is what our community can do. And the only thing that we could ask of each other is that we begin to use the full might of our political and economic power. It's not enough to just protest if we don't have demands, if we don't have a bill that we are requiring any aspiring politician to endorse and to continue to push. And if they don't endorse it, then they have to be able to feel the wrath of a community that says, no, this is what's going to happen. If you want this 13, 14, 15%, whatever the case may be, then you have to support this legislation. And that's the step that our community has to take, and not just blindly go vote for any one side of the ballot, because historically the ballot has not been filled with people who have our best interests at heart. It's not enough to vote. We have to get to a point where we're actually lobbying as well and holding people accountable and empowering our own dollars, empowering our own economic strength and reach.
Very good point. Very good point. Well, we reached almost 8:15, and I would like to allow a few minutes to address some questions. And this was a question that was rephrased, so I'll just post this part here on the screen for people to see. But it's a great question, and it's how can we train our future activists? So for parents who want to see their children grow up to be agents of change in some way, shape, or form, whether it be a career path in a nonprofit, whether it be a career path in a spiritual institution, or even as a volunteer board member, or just on a personal level, showing up when it's needed. I think there are many ways. So I'll give out a few suggestions, and then if the panelists have some others, which I hope you do, then please do suggestion. One, organizations like CARE Oklahoma, we take interns, and you're welcome to come intern with us, volunteer with us, and really get a feel for what it's like to work for a Muslim civil rights organization. So that's one suggestion. Two, Sister DeBorah, she works with Mercy Food Pantry and Sarai Ann Foundation. You can volunteer with her and do something good with your time, and also get the experience of not only working with a Muslim organization that helps serve the needy, but working with diverse volunteers and diverse individuals that come in need of help in Oklahoma. Also, you can just go to a mosque or temple, Jewish temple, synagogue, or church that you may not have visited years ago on the Interfaith Youth Tour, which is a youth tour organized by the Oklahoma Conference of Churches. We intentionally chose to go to Masjid Mu'min, which is the predominantly Black mosque in Oklahoma City, to, I forgot the name of the church, a predominantly Black church on Northeast Oklahoma City. And I forgot the third location, but all of them were predominantly Black attendees to those religious services. And the reason we chose that was because the majority of the attendees to the youth tours over the year had been white. So we wanted them to see that even though they may be Muslim, even though they may be Christian, even though they may be Jewish, that there are people of these different faith traditions that are not going to look like them. And for that reason, also, some of the experiences in those faith institutions may be a little different and unique, and something they should be aware of and should celebrate. And last but not least, my final suggestion is you can go up to the Capitol, find somebody like Senator Young, like Representative Cindy Munson, like Representative Monroe Nichols, Representative Regina Goodwin, one of our elected officials who is from a minority community, who represents a diverse community, and intern or page with them. So you can get a feel for that. Why do I say that? Why do I not just say go and intern or page with anyone? Because those that represent us and those that serve the community by passing laws have to represent the diversity of the people. And the problem, as I see it, is that our legislator and a lot of our elected bodies don't represent the diversity of our state and our country. So I suggest choose a legislator that is not from the predominant white group, so that you can get a feel for the challenges they go through and also for the opportunities they have to introduce unique legislation or work with other communities that others may not. So those are my suggestions, and I'd open the floor for anyone else who would like to add to that.
I will add to that. So I was sitting with my daughter and my grandson recently, and a commercial came up on the television about someone that's running for office. And my grandson, who is 7 years old, was listening to the commercial and said, "Ooh, are you going to vote for that person? They sound kind of mean and yucky." You know, have these conversations with your kids. Have these conversations with your grandkids, where you are talking about, if you go to the Senate, if you go to partner with someone, if you go places, are you going places that are going to encourage your child in a manner that they need to be encouraged? Are you going places that you're going to allow them to grow in an environment that is conducive to the change that we need to see? So I'm most proud of the food bank. The board is 100% diverse. The volunteers are 60% non-Muslim. There are any number of faiths that come and volunteer at the pantry, and we work together, and it's humanity serving humanity. Find those places and grow into your child that sense of diversity and betterment.
Beautiful. Anyone would like to add anything else?
There's an old story, in Jewish tradition and probably in each of the traditions represented here, that there was a person.
She froze.
No.
She froze.
Oh, no.
I want to hear the whole thing.
I think we lost Rabbi Harris for a second. We'll hang on and see if she comes back. But in the meantime, Masood or Senator Young, would you like to add anything?
I'll say something real quick. One of the best ways of helping to raise a young activist is to simply let them befriend people of other races, because you fight for your friends, right? And so many of my white friends from when I was a child are just, lighting up my Facebook page right now with messages of solidarity and beyond solidarity, fighting, on our behalf. And I find, that I don't think that they would have ever gotten to that point had they not experienced us as, my brothers and sisters and I as children, and been able to see, that any misnomer or misinformation that could be out there about Black people, they had concrete examples in us that all that stuff was not true. So it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be well planned out. It's just a matter of, hey, I'm making friends with this other person, this Black person, this brown person, somebody that's not like us. encourage that and actually ask them to seek out the one who is quiet and is not saying anything because they're feeling uncomfortable. And those people who have Black friends or friends who are minorities in that setting, they'll grow up to fight for them naturally.
I love that. I love that. That's great.
Senator Young, would you like to respond? And I'm going to ask you not only to respond, but, you know, we're getting close to the end of the program. And if you could respond, and then also perhaps just give us your words of inspiration. What can we hold on to leaving this conversation as we near the end of it that will allow us to be hopeful and to stay focused during these difficult times?
Well, to address the question, conversation and exposure. I like what DeBorah said when the young lady came and said, well, don't say that. I told you not to say that. You know, and the answer was, don't ever say that. We've got to talk to our young people. We've got to expose them because the world is so small now. It's not as large as it once was. And the world is a small place. And all of us are more, we're closer than we realize. And for us to not understand that it takes all of us. And I'm telling you, the hope for me, what I'm excited about in this moment in time is when I watch TV and CNN or MSNBC and see the crowds that are in locations not only across the United States but across this world, is again those three things I said earlier: the size of the crowds, the diversity of the crowds, and the age of the crowds. I listen, people are grabbing hold of this thing. People are seeing, young people are seeing that we need to change what has been given to us. And we who are older, the seniors, we need to start saying, come on, bring it, because we've tried, we failed, and now we are depending upon you to do what needs to be done. So the conversation and exposure, it's a great start. I think what we're doing now, I've been on several of these Zoom events, these tele events that we're talking about race and religion. When we're discussing these things, we're bringing these things to the forefront. We're bringing these things up above, out of all of the stuff that we tried to bury it under. And so now we're creating an environment. I think we'll have some great conversations. Out of those conversations, we're going to touch some belief structures. Out of touching those belief structures, we're going to have folk who are taking different actions. Out of those different actions, we will be moving toward a more just society. And so I think we're on the right track. Again, I don't want the energy to stop. I don't want the marching to stop. I don't want the young people to stop doing what they're doing. Keep putting the pressure on. And I'll add this at the end because many folks talk to me now, and fairly calm person, I think that I am. When I was younger, I was not like that. Now I talk about yearning to learn, yearning to earn so that I can become all that I can become. That's the message I share with people all the time. You ought to have that burning inside of you to learn, and you ought to have that burning inside of you, that yearning to earn so that you would be able to do the things that you want to do. But when I was younger, individuals such as H. Rap Brown and Stokely Carmichael, who was Schnick, and H. Rap Brown, who was with the Black Panthers, had three words that I used all the time, and they weren't yearning, earning, and burning. That yearning, earning, and learning. They were burn, baby, burn. Listen, that was a part of my bringing up. If you don't hear me when I speak words, then I'm going to show you through my actions. And if those actions are destructive, then that is even the better for me, because you will stop and at least pay attention to my dire straits. And so I think, I don't believe in it. I don't think we ought to be looting, burning those things, but I understand it. I understand it. And I know right now that when I see what's happening in our country and around the world, the majority of those young people who are marching, they're there for the right reason. They're not burning. They're not trying to destroy. They're trying to make a point. I have so much hope, so much. It's intriguing, don't get me wrong, but I am so encouraged by what I see that I'm excited. I'm excited about the possibilities of not only the now, but this world in the future.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for that. That's definitely something that will stay with me, and I hope will stay with all of the viewers tonight. And indeed, we're in a time in which there is a right and wrong side of history that we want to be on, and I hope we will all be upon the right side of history. because there is no neutrality on this issue. As they say, silence is violence, and to stay silent and to not speak up when people's lives are being taken, to not speak up when certain people, groups of people, because of their skin color or their religion or their ethnicity, are being treated less than human, is wrong. And we have to be willing to speak up and have the courage. And Rabbi Harris, I'm glad you were able to get back on with us. So we'd like to hear from you, because you were starting with something and we lost you. So please, before we end tonight, do provide us with your contribution.
So I'm actually not going to tell the story that I started a moment ago because of what Senator Young just said. I want to point out and maybe add to that incredible energy that he offered to us. I think about this as a time of birthing, and birth is violent, birth is bloody, birth is dangerous, birthing is traumatic, both on the birther and, quite frankly, on the child that is born. It is a dangerous time, it's a violent time, it's a bloody time, and it is a time filled with hope and new possibilities. And why do we birth? We birth because we believe in the future that can be better than the now. So maybe if we can wrap our heads around the thought of that hope, and how do we want to raise this being that we are birthing together with all of the messiness? How do we want to raise it, and what do we want it to grow into? We'll do the right thing. I believe in humanity. We'll do the right thing.
Beautiful.
Absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, I think that's a perfect ending point to this discussion. Of course, this discussion does not end, but to be respectful of everyone's time, we have to call to an end of this particular live discussion right now. But I do encourage all who are watching, all who have taken part tonight, that this is a discussion that has to continue amongst our friends, amongst our families, our social group, at work, our neighborhoods. We have to continue the conversation, and we have to see change in our country, because it's been said over and over again, enough is enough, but it can't just be words. It has to be in actions. And so I encourage you to leave tonight committed to take some action. And if you need help, feel free to reach out to any of the sponsoring organizations, and we'd be glad to give you suggestions and connect you to people. And for those who did ask questions that we couldn't get to tonight, I will make sure we get back in the comments tomorrow, and we will respond to those and make sure you get answers to your questions. However, I'd like to turn it over to Reverend Shannon Fleck from the Oklahoma Conference of Churches to close us out for this evening.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists, to all of you who've been watching and participating and engaging. In closing, I just want to say that communities of faith, no matter the faith, have to be at the center of the work that's happening. We are the voices of morality and ethics in our communities, and therefore we cannot remain silent when injustice is happening across the world. We need to be active and engaged and vocalize what's happening. And no matter what, don't be frozen by the bigness of the work of anti-racism. Here's Marilyn. Don't let that freeze you. No matter your next step, you just need to take it. So just be honest about where you are and begin the work where you're at, and that is okay. And as a parent of a young lady here, I appreciate all the conversation about parenting the next generation, raising the next generation well as she's being ushered away by her grandmother.
Well, absolutely. Thank you. And I think my son would probably break in the door any minute now. But indeed, we do this not only for the now, but we do this for the future generations. And I will say what I've said many times in different settings is that I don't want to see my children grow up in the world that I've grown up in. I want to see them grow up in a better world. And I think we all want the same thing. So with that being said, let us move forward with that intention, with that commitment, and let us take any and every action we can to see a better world today and tomorrow. Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you to all our viewers. Have a wonderful evening, and may God bless you all.
God bless.
Thank you all for having me.